Hey, deserving listeners, this is the final chapter in my deep dive on apologies and forgiveness. This is chapter 12, in which I continue to respond to your submissions to the survey I sent out. And this first section will be for free on the internet, and then the second half of this chapter will be for patrons of the podcast. But this first submission is from Lyra, who wanted me to apologize for something. They say, I want you to apologize for the adult ADHD episode. Even though the question was specifically about adult ADHD, there was a lot of focus on describing kids and their struggles. This is the case too often. Kids get so much attention, so there's barely any space for adults. That's why we needed that adult episode. Because there were things in between. That's why we needed that adult episode. Adults get neglected in this way, and the amount of time and attention kid struggles get makes it feel as if adults are supposed to manage their life fine just because they're adults. The case of growing up with ADHD is something else than childhood ADHD. Kid ADHD is not the same as adult ADHD. End of submission. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've talked about ADHD a number of times, but I do. So it's hard for me to remember exactly what episode you're referring to, but I have noticed that about myself at times, not with this topic in particular, but where someone will submit a question. This is when I'm listening back to the episode and I'm like, I didn't really answer the question. I went off on this other direction. That's annoying. Why did I do that? And a lot of times it's just because I'm not organized or something, or I don't understand the episode. And another thing is I don't know when this episode was produced, but if it was in the past, 10 years ago or something, it's possible that I didn't really understand the landscape regarding adult ADHD and was still operating from a place of ADHD as mainly a child thing, right? Another, which is wrong of me and could absolutely compound the marginalization for adults with ADHD that I was participating in. Another factor I think could have been that I will often frame things in terms of children because that's where things start. And I find that it's easier to comprehend the child context. You'll hear me often give analogies about adult issues to child issues. For example, if someone is preoccupied attachment as an adult, they might act like an adult and behave like an adult and talk like an adult and do all these adult things in a marriage. But I will often tie it to an early childhood experience where they're 3 years old and their parents are chaotic and maybe not paying attention to them in a consistent way, and the child has to ramp up their emotions and cry louder to get attunement, and so I'll often use that as a way of contextualizing and understanding the foundation of adult behavior that can look very different but be essentially the same. So I don't know if I was doing that, but yeah, absolutely. If I was framing it or paying attention to childhood ADHD when the question was about adult ADHD, then yeah, and I probably needed to know that, Lyra, because I don't know I feel like I've known that sensitivity, but maybe not to the degree that I know now because of this submission that you gave me. Because, so that tells me that there's probably a sensitivity, a totally rational sensitivity to a lot of people with adult ADHD, that they feel marginalized and misunderstood. And a lot of people would just be like, wasn't that a kid's problem? You're an adult now. How come you haven't overcome it? And yeah, adult ADHD is very particular, and it's a marginalized community. And the kinds of issues you run into with adult ADHD are sometimes even less tolerated, right? When you're a kid and you're scattered or distracted or something, although you can absolutely be marginalized and harmed and bullied and abused by all sorts of people, your parents and teachers. But at the very least, when you're a kid, there's lower expectations to some extent on sort of your self-control, right? But when you're an adult and you have ADHD and you have the same issue, the same cognitive issue as you did when you were a kid, the way in which you will be judged, right? For example, one example is you will have, say, a 40-year-old person with ADHD, and when you're talking to them and they become distracted and you can only hold their attention for a few seconds because they're untreated or they don't have ways of managing it, and you can feel extremely angry at them. Just like, I can't believe you're narcissistically not listening to me. Like, you can only manage listening to me for 3 seconds. You must have no empathy. You're a psychopath. I hate you. That kind of energy. Whereas you have a fourth grader who can't listen to you for longer than 3 seconds. I feel like a lot of, at least on average, I think more people would forgive that, right? But it's not like fourth grade ADHD is really any fundamentally different than 40-year-old ADHD in that way, that it can make it hard to pay attention and to focus when someone is telling you a not so interesting story, So yeah, I could see how that would hurt, and I'm sorry I did that to you, Lara. All right, this next submission is from patron M from SoCal. I won't read her entire submission, but I think your questions here and your situations here are telling me that you are struggling with relationships and you want to know how to improve in your ability to apologize or to elicit apologies so that you can have closer relationships and more stable relationships. And what I will say to that is, if I haven't already addressed that for the most part in this deep dive, let me know by emailing me. All right, this next submission is from Astra. They want me to apologize for the following thing. They say, I'm not sure I need an apology, but I would really want you to go back and watch the first episodes of Colt and Larissa again. I've seen many comments more or less feeling ignored because you didn't acknowledge their concerns. You didn't really understand what the issue was. End of submission. Yeah. So there's a lot to say here, and it's been a while because this was probably a couple years ago when I first started doing this. And what I'll say is what I think was happening, and I will apologize, so just let me kind of walk through this, kind of remind myself to some extent, was, Colt and Larissa were, there's a number of years that they were on 90 Day Fiancé. And when I started watching, everyone had already seen almost their entire story, if not their entire story, and they had seen where it ended up. And so when I was reacting to the first number of episodes, I had no idea where it was headed. And I did not have the benefit of knowing what Colt was capable of, because it was either hidden from the show by him, or the show was editing it out, or he hadn't been triggered yet, or something. And so my impression was, as I was reacting to it, a number of people had already known what Colt was capable of and were hurt and upset at me because I wasn't calling that out or seeing the signs, really. And it's hard to know exactly what is the objective truth here, because there were a lot of people that were defending me and saying like, well, hey, people, because there was back and forth in the comment section, and there were a lot of people saying he hasn't seen the next season, so give him some time. You already know where this is going, so he's reacting. If you want him to watch ahead, that's not really a reaction series. So, have some mentalization skills and know that he doesn't know what he doesn't know, and so he's going to react from what he's seeing. So that's one perspective. And in addition to this, as a subset of this, it's really hard for us to mentalize, particularly if we've been harmed, but even if we haven't been harmed relationally and are developmentally kind of stunted in that way, it's really hard for us to, for example, for me, if I were to go back, so Umberto used to love Donald Trump's TV show, The Apprentice. He actually looked up to Donald Trump back then. He's talked about this before. And if I were to, given everything that I know about Donald Trump today and giving my feelings about him, I mean, back in the day, I didn't really have any feelings about him, but, after the onslaught of him on Twitter over the past number of years, I have a lot of associations with him. And so for me to go back in time, 10 years, and if I were to sit, get in a time machine, I'm sitting next to Umberto and he's watching The Apprentice and he's, praising him and saying all these great things, I don't know if I could objectively deal with that, it would be really hard for me to see Donald Trump through his eyes from 10, 15 years ago. It would be really hard for me to do that. I'd just be like, what? I mean, because I would see these hints of what he's capable of, and I would see the signs of what was to come, because the signs were there. If you go back to The Apprentice, all the signs are there. Like there's a clear through line, right? And it would be really hard for me to be in his shoes. And two, it'd be really hard for me not to judge Umberto for liking Donald Trump. Whereas if I was really back there 15 years ago, if I back then ran into Umberto while he was watching The Apprentice and I saw him praising and worshiping Donald Trump on that show. I don't know how much he worshiped him, but something along those lines. I think I would not notice it at all. I think, if I remember right, I probably would have just been like, he likes this show, who cares? That's hard for me to imagine, because of all the associations and all the emotions I have about that man. So that is another part of this, right? That even if you kind of know, oh, well, he doesn't know, you're watching me watch Colt and Larissa, and you're just like, well, he doesn't know what Colt is capable of because he hasn't seen that yet. Even if you know that intellectually and you're really living in that space, it's hard. If I were to go back and watch the Colt and Larissa first few episodes, I probably would see the signs. I'd probably be like, ooh, we know where that heads. We know where that goes. Okay. So that's something to think about in terms of your feelings as you were watching me watch Colt and Larissa. I know you already know that because there was all that in the comment section. And I think there's a lot of validity to that, by the way. But there's another part to this, which is that I could absolutely, I don't know. I'm not an objective observer of reality, and I'm not anything close to perfect. So is there a possibility that Larissa's demeanor somehow tweaked me a little bit or biased me a little bit? Yeah, absolutely. Not only is there a chance, that always is present. You are biased. I am biased. Everyone is biased. Everyone's coming from a particular point of view. And I'm not downplaying my bias, and I could have been absolutely biased in a way that was overlooking Colt's issues and was overlooking the signs of Colt being who he eventually showed himself to be later. So could that be happening? Yes. But I'll return to something I was saying earlier is, are you asking me to apologize to Larissa? Because you can't ask me to apologize to someone else. What you're asking me to apologize. The question was, how do you want me to apologize to you? So Astra, again, with previous submissions in this section, I have to read between the lines. And if you were sitting here, I'd ask you, but you're not. So I suspect that you personally felt as though I was discounting issues you went through, that I was overlooking the abuse you went through by overlooking the abuse or the signs of abuse from Colt. And for that, I would absolutely apologize for, because if it felt that way to you, then that is, mortifying to me, that you would feel that I would not care about the abuse you went through. And but I don't know if that's what you're asking me to apologize for. You know what I mean? So if you would like to email in and, tell me something, then go for it. But I think that's probably what it was. And I absolutely will apologize for that. I want my content to not hurt people in that way. And there's a lot of things I could have done, even from my ignorant place. So another factor here is that I sometimes will not read the comment section because people will spoil it. They'll say, well, he does this in the future, and that makes it so I can't actually look at the comments, right? Because I don't want things to be spoiled. I do a lot of things to avoid things being spoiled. Like when Stacy and I are watching 90 Day Fiance, sometimes I'll react, and then afterwards I'll go upstairs and I'll watch the episode again with her. And there's those little things at the end or the beginning where they'll be like, coming up next week or coming up in this season. And I immediately tell her to pause the show, because for her, she'll watch that stuff. But for me, I do not want to watch it. I want it to be a clean experience for me to react to. And two, it's more entertaining for me to be, I don't want things to be spoiled, So there's another assumption that I think was natural, that because people are commenting, that I would read it and thus I would adjust my content because of that. But I don't remember precisely, because this was, I think, more than 2 years ago. There's a chance that I wasn't even aware of what was even happening in the comment section precisely, and that's on me. I should have said in the videos, by the way, if you're giving me details in the comment section, I'm not reading the comments, because sometimes people spoil it and I can't read the comments. I also could have had a comment of just like, or a caveat of like, hey, if you check in with yourself, because if you're feeling like really angry at me because of the way I'm reacting to this mostly faked TV show, by the way, we all understand that this isn't exactly objective reality, like it's it is kind of scripted and engineered and edited. So we just have to always understand that. So if you're if you're angry at me and feel viscerally like attacked by me, then check in with yourself and clarify what's going on with you. Because if you're being triggered, let me address that, know that I care about that. And this was maybe more relevant to the trial. And this was absolutely happening. So there were two groups of people. There were the pro Johnny Depp people and there were the pro Amber Heard people. There were people in the middle and there were other groups, but there were people that are very pro Johnny Depp and there were people who were very pro Amber Heard. And in order for me not to piss them off, in order for me not to be a victim of their bullying and their anger and their attacks, in order for me to avoid that, the only way for me out of that was to completely agree with everything Johnny Depp's team said and to completely disagree with everything Amber Heard, and vice versa. Like that was the only way I could win with certain groups of people. And that's just not possible, right? And it's not rational either. So if you're watching me react to a couple on 90 Day Fiancé and you start to have a feeling, I would ask for both of us that you actually check in with what exactly is happening inside of you. Because if I totally agree with Colt, then there's another group of people that are, or if I totally agree with Larissa, there's another group of people that are pro-Colt, because there are pro-Colt people out there. You might be surprised about it, but there are. So you want to check in with yourself and say like, well, I depend on Kirk to feel like a safe place that I can feel like my traumas are validated. And there's something about his reaction to Colt and Larissa that's making me feel not safe. Check in with yourself and tell me that, because if you tell me that, I can address that. If the pro Johnny Depp people, and some of them did, by the way, reached out to me and said something like that, I could say, okay, yeah, putting aside the trial, what you went through was awful. We know that to be true. You went through abuse. You were abused. And that is awful. And I'm sorry you went through that. Independent of that, apparently you and I look at the trial differently. You know what I'm saying? And then people who are pro Amber Heard, some of them would reach out to me and I would say, okay, putting aside the trial, what you went through was awful. You were abused by your partner who had a similar presentation as Johnny Depp. And what you went through was real, there's no debate about that. And I believe you that you went through it, and I'm sorry that you went through it, and it's awful that you went through it. It's awful that the system let you down, and all those validations that I would give, because I can do that, and I want to do that, right? So it's important to be differentiated enough and self-aware enough to know exactly what's happening inside of you, because if you depend on me to react to a certain thing on the internet in a way that agrees with you, and thus that either validates or invalidates your abuse, then that is unfair to me. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's putting me in an impossible situation where I cannot not abuse people. You know what I mean? Like, because there's always going to be various different people holding on to various different things, right? There's no way for me not to harm people. If people depend on and see it that way, then I might as well just pack it in, because I don't want to be harming people. So that's part of the whole apology system, right? I will apologize for not taking it into account, not providing more caveats, not maybe asking Stacy to look at the comments and for us to have a conversation about it so I could step in, not realizing earlier on that there was a group of people that were being triggered by the whole thing, and not addressing that more directly. Eventually I did. Eventually once I finally kind of figured out what was happening, because it was really... it was hard. Anyway, point is I didn't really know. And then once I figured it out, I actually made a comment and I pinned it at the top, and because I was hoping that people would see it. Because the other thing is I record episodes in batches. So I had a whole bunch of more Colt and Larissa episodes that were still recorded, ready to be released. And those future episodes were not going to reflect what I was now learning from the comment section. So I pinned this comment, and a lot of people, hundreds of people actually read it and commented and liked it and stuff. And it was something along the lines of, hey, I hear you. And it sounds like a lot of people are thinking I'm biased, and I probably am biased. And if that is bothersome, I get that. I was totally agreeing and on board and apologetic. And so we have to work together on that. I will apologize for harm that I commit to you, the listener, regardless of what it is. And you have to work with me on that. You have to give me an avenue to apologize for something that makes sense to me, right? Because I'm not going to apologize for reacting to a mostly scripted, quote unquote, reality TV show off the cuff, working with what I have, and maybe even coming from a normal human bias. I'm not going to apologize for having the reactions that I did, especially given the fact that it was edited in a certain way and I had no idea what was going to eventually happen. And I can only do what I can do. I can only react from what I can react to. So I'm not going to apologize for that, but I absolutely can apologize if I do something that makes you feel shitty, like that I care about, and that I could do things to account for that. You know what I'm saying? So Astra, I don't know, this probably doesn't feel very apologetic, but I hope that it comes across that, well, okay, so I guess I would like an apology too. And I have received apologies, that I will apologize to you, and I feel like I have, if you apologize to me. I don't know if you were one of the people, Astra, but I feel like I deserve an apology. Maybe this is the next step where we're at, people, is, okay, fine, I will apologize, and I will, and I mean it, and I want to, and that's a value of mine. It's not hard for me to do. I don't feel worse about myself because I recognize that I do stupid things sometimes that I need to apologize for. It's normal. I have enough self-esteem and experience to know that there's nothing wrong with me because I make a mistake and I need to apologize. And this is kind of rare for me to actually even say, even in my personal life, but I would like an apology from people out there, because I'll tell you, over the past 6 months, during the trial and after, most people were totally great and massively supportive, as evidenced by the fact that, out of the, I think there were a couple hundred responses to this survey, there was only a handful of people that wanted me to apologize for anything. And most everyone was like, why would you apologize to me? You're fine, So, most of y'all are, I'm not asking it from you, but to those, if any of you out there are some of the people that you felt like you were being unfair to me, which is, it's normal to happen. Everyone can have their reactions and be unfair. And I will tell you that some people have been unfair to me and are continuing to be unfair to me. I'm not saying you, Astra, you're not being mean at all in your comment. You're just like, hey, you should probably just go back and watch that, because I don't think you were really seeing the things. But I guess to model asking for apologies, I'm minorly struggling still from being slapped around by a lot of people. If you were one of those people who were overly harsh with me, understand that you were one of hundreds, if not thousands, of people that were overly harsh to me. It's one thing for just one person to be harsh with me, right? It's another thing to be, and it's also another thing to have it just be a constant element in one's life. Like I'd have a couple of days where I wasn't slapped around, and then I'd start to kind of recover, and then boom, more slapping around. And it just becomes so difficult to cope with emotionally. And I still have symptoms of, I'm just going to call it like the trauma of it all. And I say trauma because I was worried that people are going to literally kill me and my family. I mean, that's at an extreme, but there's a lot of things up and to that worry in terms of what people, or at the very least, is people hating me or ganging up against me or something. It doesn't feel good. So I would like an apology. And if you were not one of those people, then I don't need an apology from you. And also, I don't even necessarily need you to send a supportive email, because I got a lot of that. If you want to, obviously, it's great. But I've received a lot of compassionate emails of people saying, like, I've always loved you and you're great, and I know people were attacking you, and know that the most of us don't see you that way. And so I feel like I've really internalized that. But I think the last bit is, and I'm sure I'm never going to get it, especially from the mob, because they're still out there, by the way, still talking about me in the trial. It's just like, it's been months since I've stopped talking about the trial, and they're still at it. It's weird. It's like, I don't know. Now, I'm sure I'm just one of 1,000 people that they're mobbing against, but it's like, I'm trying to just not be on your radar anymore. Like, why am I still on your radar? Anyway, so because when I edit now, or when I podcast now, I'm hesitant. I'm really hesitant. I'm scared. When I when I record episodes, I'm afraid. I'm afraid of you, the listener. Not you, but some of you. Like I'm walking on eggshells as I'm podcasting. I don't know if it's apparent. I'm trying not to let it come out, but it's making me not a good podcaster. I mean, it's good that I know how to account for things prior to stepping on a landmine, but if I'm constantly thinking about landmines, that's not a good experience for me, one, because I'm afraid, and two, it makes it so I'm not spontaneous. It makes it so that I'm not very communicative or in the right headspace, So now I would say 95% of the time I'm fine, but I don't know. I'm still I'm still walking. I don't want to have this feeling anymore. I don't want to have this feeling of fear when I sit down to record an episode. And I have a little bit of it, a lot less than 4 months ago, but it's still kind of there. So you could help me out if you were one of those harsh people. If you have it in you and you think I deserve it, if you could apologize, that would help me. And I say this because it's true. And I also say it because I want to model that when we have needs, we notice them and we elicit apology, that we ask for it, and we are vulnerable. We recognize our humanness and we recognize our need, right? Because when I would say this to a lot of other people, including other YouTubers, that they would say to me like, well, just, trolls are going to troll, let it go. Who cares? That's just the way of the world. You have to have thicker skin. And that just never really worked for me. And I've been over this already, but I would rather have it so that we were like regular humans and I could actually just tell you how you hurt me or scared me, and then you could have compassion and apologize, and then I could forgive you, and then we could be close again. and I could trust you again. Again, you listening are probably not the problem, but if you were, then I am talking to you. You know what I'm saying? Well, that was interesting. Let's move on. All right, this next submission is from patron Mary. She says, I would love to hear your thoughts about victims of relationship abuse apologizing to their abuser. I did that for many years, and this destroyed me. It happened little by little. I felt justification in apologizing to my perpetrator because he is a lovely person with a lot of hurt and pain and who I care about, and I am annoying because I am avoiding every conversation that could lead to a fight. And then you go on to describe some of the apologies that you said to him, and I don't think I need to read all those, but I can talk generally, Mary, to what you're talking about, which is that, when we are abused, we have to choose from several bad choices, and one of the options available to us is to become subservient and to apologize to the abuser, and maybe even adopt a point of view that we are the bad person and that the perpetrator is actually the good person, because it's obviously not rational and it's not overall functional, but it might be more functional than actually pushing back, because to push back might incur more abuse or something along those lines. So there's that. And if you're a compassionate person, you might actually see the good in your perpetrator. You might understand where the abuse comes from, that it's not because they're a jerk face inherently, it's because they're triggered or something. And so you might see that. And so there might be an avenue toward having compassion for that. And it makes it easier to be a doormat in that situation to survive. And you describe it pretty well, how it can destroy you because, one, the abuse is highly destructive, but then your solution to it was to kind of subdue yourself, right? To convince yourself that you deserve it, or that you're just as much to blame for the problem. And, that's where the gaslighting comes in. And of course, his behavior is along those lines as well. It's not like you're alone in that campaign to gaslight yourself. So, it's awful. It's a thing that is known to us. It's a thing that we do in those situations. And it can actually make apologies after extracting yourself from the relationship difficult, right? Because when you extract and you look back and you think, oh my God, I was apologizing all the time for things that I should never have apologized for. Or at the very least, he should be apologizing 100 more times than I was. Like, well, I'm never going to apologize again. And then the next time you're in a situation where you might want to, or should apologize, you might actually not, because you're drawing a boundary, you're drawing a line, and you're like, ooh, I know what this feels like. I have an urge to apologize. This means I must be being gaslit, or it feels unsafe to apologize, to give someone else the upper hand, that kind of thing. And that's natural as well. So yeah, abuse is far-reaching, way beyond the relationship after it ends. All right, so if you want to hear the rest of this episode, you have to become a patron of the podcast, in which I finish my deep dive, which I have to say is very gratifying to finish this series. I've really enjoyed working on it, and I've enjoyed reading your submissions and answering them. I've learned a lot. I've developed a lot personally and professionally. So yeah, if you want to hear the rest of this chapter, become a patron of the podcast. Do it now. Do it. Become one of us if you want to.